Hello, everybody, and welcome to the I Am 1-2 podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Cohn, and with me always is my co-pilot, Dan the Man, also known as Lieutenant Dan, in the studio. Say hi, Dan.
How's everybody doing?
Thank you all for joining us this week. I hope you got a chance to see our first episode. We had a good time doing it, and hopefully we'll continue that spirit in this one as well. This podcast, if you're just happening on it, our idea is to educate and to provide as much information on this subject of addiction, recovery, the suffering, all the people that get involved, and general life skills. We don't want to just limit it to addiction over time, but how do I get tools to deal with this crazy world we have and to improve my life and to hopefully have a better experience of being a human being. A lot of people, if you talk to them, they'll say, I don't know what this life is all about, and I don't understand what's going on, and I'm also not really happy. I pay attention to those things. The happiness index that comes out every year and talks about what countries are the happiest, and you may be not surprised to learn that the United States fell 3 more notches down for people reporting being happy. So if any of the tools we can provide you in here, everybody I know talks about the world being really messed up and what's wrong with people, and all they do is complain about it, but they don't think about what might be wrong. And in this man's opinion, what's wrong is they don't have any tools. You're watching people in traffic at the store, and the only tool they've been taught by our country that I grew up in is consumerism. Buy something, make yourself feel better. Consume something. That's supposed to make you feel better. So if we can provide any help, any tools to help you rise above that, and as we say at my home group, jump out of the matrix for a little bit so you can see that we're all in this bubble of weirdness. Hopefully this will help. On our second episode, first episode, we talked about addiction and its causes, some of the pharmacological aspects neurologically and what's happening in the brain with dopamine and all that stuff. This episode, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. I love to bring up in group because I know my people have probably not heard about this in your standard treatment center. And that topic is what is really wrong with us. Which is a deep topic. When you're talking to any alcoholic, you say, what's wrong with you? I used to hear that from my family all the time. What's wrong with you? And the only answer I had from them was, how much time do you have? And I can tell you exactly what's wrong with me. And still, I could recite for hours what's wrong with me and still not understand myself for what's really going on. So hopefully after this podcast, if you suffer from this disease, or if you know someone who suffers from this disease, you will get some tools to be able to navigate that better. We're going to do a section on education at first, where I'll talk about the topic. Then Dan and I will kick that around a little bit. And then after that, we're going to have a questions portion of the program. So as I say in every episode, and I'll say it at the end of this episode, please, if you have any question about anything, relationships, job, money, well, I can't help you find winning stocks in the stock market, but I can certainly help you navigate not making money or God. So send it to us at the IM12recovery@gmail.com. Again, that's IM12 word recovery@gmail.com, and we will help as best we can to give you some tools. All right, so as we talk about this topic of what do we really suffer from, I need to back up and start with some basics, because when people come into my group, and I'm a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor, I'm here in this role in these podcasts more as a fellow sufferer. I'm not trying to represent myself as a professional in this particular format. However, I will definitely bring all of my skills and expertise and experience to help you with your questions. But my patients are very confused because they've had their family members and friends telling them for their entire life, you need to stop drinking or drugging or whatever the addictive behavior is. And if you would just do that, everything would be better. And anybody that suffers from this illness knows that's a lie. That's a lie with a capital L. When I stop using the only thing I know works for me to be able to enjoy this thing called life and to make it tolerable, things do not get better. They get way worse, and it's like an electric jump spike worse. So this approach that the alcohol or the drugs is the problem has been failing us throughout the history of mankind. And there was a doctor named Dr. Silkworth, who was this brilliant man who worked with Bill Wilson, the co-founder of AA, who figured out, Bill, I think you suffer from a deeper malady. It's not the drinking or drugging. Actually, the drinking or drugging is your solution. It's not your problem. And please go to meetings where they talk about that. If you go to some bad meetings, all they do is talk about the problem. Oh, it's so terrible. And I did all these horrible things. And you don't hear any solution talk. The solution is, wait a minute. The drugs and alcohol wasn't my problem. My real problem is me. How do I navigate this brain I have, which is definitely different than an average person? And I'm going to back up and explain that in a second. But I had a brilliant sponsor one time who was a multimillionaire. He used to travel the world on business, and I would call him, and he'd say, oh, I'm in the Amazon. We're going down the Nile. And I'd say, you're up to some shady stuff. What are you doing down there? But he told me, very successful man, every morning he took a Post-it note everywhere he traveled in the world, and he would put it on the mirror where he shaved every day. And the note would say, you're looking at the biggest problem you're going to have today. He knew that the deeper malady I have is when I'm sober. My drugs and alcohol is my medication to try and treat my state of mind so that life is more tolerable, people are more tolerable, my emotions are more tolerable. Okay, so I just wanted to establish that first. There's a term in recovery we use for this loosely. This is not a scientific term. I've picked up on this as I've heard people say this over the years. It's called the isms of recovery. And I think it comes from the word alcoholism. And as one of my good friends like to say, it's alcoholism, not alcoholism. So just because you put down the drinking doesn't mean you're fixed. Doesn't mean you're any better. It just means you put down your solution. And now you got to find new solutions to be able to lean on, because you're still going to have to deal with your emotions, your job, and this world and all that stuff. Okay. So when I think about this topic, I go back to, I've got a writer's soul. I've worked hard at it. And I used to think I wanted to be an actor, but I've talked to my mom the other day, and I figured out I'm actually more of a writer's spirit. And I observe people. I've been observing people ever since I was young. And I used to think that was because I was an actor trying to observe how to act and do certain things they do. But now it's more of like figuring it out. I think that's what I was trying to do as a kid, is to figure it out. So we have this wealth of information in the program of millions of people's stories. Okay. This is an experiment that's been going on since 1935. All these people coming into these groups, and they're sharing their direct experience. This is what happened to me. This is what happened. You cannot argue with those facts. Scientifically, you can't argue with that. That is what happened to the person. That is what they felt. That is what they went through. And you will hear the same themes when people are telling their story long before they ever picked up a drug or a drink. And it's astonishing how common these themes are, the isms, the things that are wrong with us when we're sober. So you might hear a person say, when I was young, I just felt different. I didn't know what it was, but I was looking around my family and I just felt weird. I just felt a little bit off. There was just something about me. And then when I tried to explain it to my loved ones, they usually gave me that look like, whoa, Chris, that's just you. You're strange. We don't know who you came from. Maybe the postman, but you're definitely not one of us. And I learned from that, and I warned my patients. That was when I learned to shut down and shut up and not share and not trust. When I was made fun of, or when people ostracized me. Because that's another feeling you'll hear from people who have this disease. I feel different. I feel like I don't fit in. I feel like I don't know where my place is. I don't feel safe. I feel nervous. You'll go to a doctor, they'll say, oh, you got anxiety. And I'm like, well, maybe not. But if you have alcoholism, you definitely have anxiety. You've got anxiety all the time. But I'll tell you the general catch-all, because everybody has their own unique stories and their all unique experience of this disease. But the catch-all phrase you will hear in our program is, I just don't feel comfortable in my own skin. And if you have a child in your life and there is alcoholism that runs in your family, and we talked last week about this being a genetic condition, you can actually observe a kid where the other kids are over here playing and this kid's over on his own looking like he's real uncomfortable and he doesn't know what to do. You can see the behaviors. Now, some of that you can attribute and say, well, that's just growing up, and that's the way kids are. They're not sure. They're trying to find their place in the peer system. But as you will learn from this podcast, we tend to feel these things more intensely. And then that drives us to look for something called relief. And then that drives us into alcohol and drugs. And then I'm just trying to find something to make myself feel better, which, by the way, is not a moral sin. Nor is that a weakness. That is how we are wired as biological beings. If your dog has a wound and it's bleeding and the dog is licking it to make it feel better and it doesn't know it's infecting it, it's going to do it anyway because it's making it feel better. That's what human beings are like as well. If I have a pain, I have a need, my brain will tell me, go do something to fix that. And that's how we fall into these chemicals, which are addictive. And because they're addictive, they nab you. So as I hear these stories, there's a couple that have jumped out at me over the years that just are my favorites. As a kid, I used to have terrible anxiety to the point where I couldn't go to bed at night. And I hear this from a lot of my friends. Like, they were up and they could not go to sleep. And I was worried about stuff that you should not be worried about at 7 years old. Like what's going to happen 20 years from now? What's going to happen to the world? What's going on? Plus, I was growing up in an alcoholic family system, so anxiety is your best friend. And I heard a speaker one time say, when I was a kid, I was up one night and I'm thinking, and I can't sleep and I need to go to bed for school, but I'm wondering if Proposition 7 is going to pass in the California legislature. And immediately I started laughing because he started saying, why do I as a child know about this? Why am I even aware that this is going on? He saw it on TV or he picked it up from his parents talking, but why is he worried about it? And it doesn't make any sense. He shouldn't be worried about that. But he just knew there's something about him. I've also talked to a lot of people who had stomach issues or asthma or conditions like that. And I think that also is related to growing up in alcoholic family systems. I'm not saying it was caused by that, but I'm saying it's exacerbated by that. And I certainly had stomach issues and nervousness. And they'd take me to the doctor and they'd say, he's fine. But did a doctor ever ask me, are you growing up in an alcoholic family system? Are you not getting sleep because your father's up almost beating up your wife, your mother every night? Nobody ever asked me that. So one of my favorite speakers, Bob Earl, no longer with us, but God rest his soul. He was a genius. That's Earl, Earll. He talks about this story that really touches my heart more than any of the other stories I heard about being a kid with this disease. And that's what I'm suggesting to you. The world is not telling you. You had this genetic condition, the state of mind, long before you ever took a drink or a drug. That's what the deeper malady means. Okay? They're not teaching us that because they don't understand that about us. They think it all started from the time we took our first drink. And my argument is, no, it started a long time before that. And most of my friends, if you listen to their stories, found other ways to cope when they were kids. Either they used food, sex, acclaim. My sponsor used approval. He would always do all good things for his mama, and he'd get a pat on the head. He was a good boy, and that gave him that sense of self-worth. All that stuff to fill up this emptiness that I'm feeling inside, okay? But Bob Earl tells this story that when I was a kid, he says, I was 5 years old, and I would crawl out the trellis of my two-story home, and I would go sit in the lawn chair in the backyard, and I would stare up at the sky, because I just knew that the spaceship that left me here was going to realize they made a mistake and come back and get me. Now think about that. 5 years old, and he has the consciousness to know he doesn't fit in this world. He's not able to navigate it like these other people seem to be able to. And that is another theme I hear from people. People would say, like, I don't know, it seemed like we were absent in class that day. These other people seem to learn how to deal with these things, and I never quite got how to deal with these things. I will tell you another thing that happens to us. A lot of us get misdiagnosed with ADD or ADHD in class. And nobody asks them, are you growing up in an alcoholic family house? Did you get enough sleep last night? Is anybody supporting you to get your homework done? Or do you have a learning disability? Maybe that's another issue, okay? So our co-founder of the AA program has this brilliant quote on page 2, which lays it all out. He says, when I took that first drink, quote unquote, I was part of life at last. Exclamation point. I was part of life at last. Now, any good drunk or drug addict will tell you, if they're honest, that first use, when they bonded with their peers and they had that sense of camaraderie and we are a group and I feel it in my own skin. I know the first time I used, I felt like, you mean I can just be myself and you guys like me? I didn't care what they thought. I didn't have that terrible worry going on. How am I coming off? Am I coming off okay? What do they think about me? Just that constant chatter, which we call the committee in your head. Talk about that in a little bit. I didn't have that. It put it to sleep. And I could just be me. And that was enough. That's a miracle when that happens. In fact, in Bill Wilson's life, not only was it part of life at last, in other words, in case you missed it, back up, he didn't really feel a part of things up till that. He was going through the motions. He went through school, he got a girlfriend, he got married, he got a job. He's going through the motions, but he didn't really feel a part of it. He didn't feel the juice, as we call it in my home group. He was just going through the motions, figuring this is the way everybody feels. It's not the way everybody feels. I'll explain that a little bit too. But he called it the elixir to life. And since I'm a wordsmith, I like to write. I love looking up words. Elixir is a beautiful cure-all for everything. It's bigger than a remedy. It's bigger than a cure. An elixir is like if you play video games and you're a role-playing video game person, an elixir is like the thing that heals your whole party to full maximum health and you're ready to take on the boss. It's a cure-all for everything. So Bill Wilson ends up in this treatment center. It was called an asylum. Back then, they didn't have treatment centers. And they usually didn't do anything for drug addicts and alcoholics. In fact, they called them spin dries. What they would do is they'd let them go through the withdrawals. They'd have to shake it off and just have DTs and scream at night. I'll tell you, there's a great movie. I knew it was going to go right out of my head. Ray Milland, but The Lost Weekend. There's that movie where he gets committed to an institution overnight, and it's all the guys are screaming because bugs are crawling on him, and the orderlies are coming in because the guy's losing control and beating up another patient, and it's just madness. And that was your treatment, so to speak, back in the 1930s. But luckily, he had this doctor named Dr. Silkworth. And Dr. Silkworth was the first doctor in American history that got press, I should say, because there were others. And there were also a lot of doctors in France in the 1800s who apparently did some really serious research on what was wrong with us. He started looking at Bill and saying, Bill, I think there's something deeper going on here, because I know you're telling me you don't want to use when you leave, but you're coming back drunk. So I got to figure out what's wrong with you when you're sober. And I don't know if you've ever been in an inpatient hospital setting, but the patients are there 24 hours a day. So if you can work there, you can sort of sit back and watch them. Like, how does this person act when they're playing cards with their peers? Are they cheating, or are they being up and up? And how's this person over here in the smoke area? Is he cheating and getting an extra cigarette when he should only smoke one? Or how's he grabbing an extra dessert at lunch? Because we do all that stuff, and you can see it all in an inpatient setting. And as Dr. Silkworth got a chance to experience him, because he was in his treatment center 29 times. So that's your hope out there for anybody out there that's still suffering. You've been to multiple treatments. I doubt you've been to 29. And this is the guy that ended up changing a lot of people's lives. So don't give up hope. And he said, come in here, Bill. I think I know what's wrong with you when you're sober. I think I know what's maybe causing you to take that first drink, which is crucial. If I don't take that first drink, I won't get drunk, and I won't have everything else happen. And he said, well, I wish you'd tell me. I have no idea. He says, well, Bill, I think you're naturally, and I like the word naturally because I tell my patients, it's like those old National Geographics we saw in high school where they said, here's the tiger in its natural environment. Let's observe what it does. So imagine you're watching this drunk get more uncomfortable in his own skin. And Dr. Silkworth put brilliant words on this condition. He said, I think you're irritable. I think you're restless. And I think you're discontent. Now, I heard those words at 22 years old in a treatment center, and I did not relate to them. And I said, you don't know me. Those don't apply to me at all. I'm a happy guy. I don't have any problems. We all go through treatment with this delusion that I'm fine. But nobody explained to me what they meant. So I'd like to just discuss the definitions of these words, because you will rarely hear this. You can go to meetings all over the world, and sometimes they'll say those words out loud. They will in our downtown meetings in Louisville. Irritable, restless, discontent. They will shout them out. And you will sit there and go, I don't know what that means. Irritable, real simple. Look it up. Easily made mad. Easily irritated. When we are sober, if you are trying to stay sober and you are less than a week sober, if you're less than a month sober, you will find that your family and the news and your job and everything around you is really getting on your nerves, man. It is just grating. And it's like this Chinese water torture drip of just like, I don't know how much more I can take of this before we scamper and run to the liquor store. So Bill is naturally easily triggered, easily made mad. He might be fine 1 second and then he just blows up. Okay? That's not bipolar. We will be diagnosed with bipolar. It's called alcoholism. Then he said, you're restless. Bill, you can't sit still, Bill. Even as I'm talking to you, your leg's going, or you're already trying to get out the door. This is a phenomenal condition I have observed 1,000 times in my group. When we used to meet in person prior to the pandemic, now we're on Zoom. A person would be presenting their first step, which is a very emotional story. They're telling what happened to them. And by the time I get them to the end of their first step, they will start breaking down and just amazing emotions just pouring off them. And if you look around the room, because I'm sitting up front observing everybody's plugged in and they're leaning forward and some of them are crying too and everybody's involved except the new guy. And I look over here and this guy is literally completely oblivious to what's happening in the room, and he's grabbing his book and he's grabbing his folder and he puts it in his lap and he sits up and he does that. And I'll literally wait for an opportune time to interrupt because I don't want to interrupt what's happening. I let them have the thing finish, and then I'll say, what are you doing? And he'll be like, what? Huh? It spooks him, and he throws his folder in the chair. I said, I want to do nothing. I said, you got somewhere you need to be? No. Why are you doing? I don't know. But he felt like he needed to go. I liken it to a cat. If a cat is laying there, it's still sleeping, and then just goes out of the room, that's an alcoholic. It's like, where'd he go? He had to go. He couldn't sit still. He couldn't take it anymore. And you should see the way newcomers bolt out of our meeting, right? We try to get them hang around, get some numbers, talk to some guys, and you look and it's a poof of smoke. It's like, where'd he go? I have no idea. He's out the door. That's restless. I cannot sit still. I'm constantly looking for the next thing. I feel like I'm missing out. I got FOMO big time, fear of missing out. Man, I need to go. There's something better going on somewhere else. And it won't shut up. And then finally, discontent. There is nothing that is going to satisfy me, even if God himself comes down tomorrow and says, here's $10 million. My first thought will be, well, it's not really $10 million because I got to pay taxes. And I will start nitpicking the negatives. Our brains tend to lean on the negative. Listen to your brain. Listen to your thoughts. You'll be astonished how this happens during a 24-hour period while you're doing the dishes, cutting the grass, and you're not paying attention to what you're thinking. Stop yourself and ask yourself, was that a positive thought or was that a negative thought? And according to the founders and according to my experience, it will be a fear-based negative thought. Anxiety, worry, concern. So yeah, I got all these other blessings in my life, but my cell phone's broken, so fuck. Nothing else is working. My cell phone's broken. My cell phone's broken. My cell phone's broken. And you will obsess on that small thing and neglect everything else in your life that's perfect. That's discontent. I am never satisfied. I am never happy. And when I get something good, I'll just throw it in the corner 2 months later and I'll forget about it and I'll already be thinking about the next thing I need. You could give me everything in the world and I'm going to be like, yeah, but I need I'll fight to get her, and I get her, and I want her, and she's my perfect love, and then she's not acting right. And 3 months later, I think, well, maybe I need to be with her. Or I'll pick this major in college, and I'm going to get this, and I'm going to be this profession, and then, well, maybe I need to be this profession. That is a common story for us. Talk to addicts and alcoholics who had 5 different majors in college or never finished college. That is another common theme. I am just discontent. I'm just never satisfied. So those are 3 states: irritable, restless, discontent. That seems bad enough where if I lived with that all day long, by about 5 o'clock, I'm going to need to do something to get some relief from that state of mind. Now, adding on top of that, 2 most diagnosed conditions that my patients will get coming in the door, and they have to do this in assessment. They have to look at the person. They have to say, what do I see? And what are they reporting? And depression and anxiety will be the number 2 things they get. And so they think, well, I need to be in a dual group, or I need medication, or I need a psychiatrist. And I like, whoa, let's slow that down. Because you either have a biochemical depression, which is a real deal, that you need real medication, and that's a separate thing, or do you have it induced by circumstances because of your alcoholism? If you name me one addict or alcoholic that gets to treatment and they're not depressed, that person is in delusion because their life is in the toilet. And if they're not depressed, that's not normal. Also, if they're not anxious, that's not normal because they have been doing a lot of bad things to a lot of people, and their ego is telling them, I better sleep with one eye open because they're going to catch up with me and they're going to whoop my ass. Okay? So those are common conditions, but again, we feel that as addicts, alcoholics. Okay? These are our normal states according to Dr. Silkworth and our experience. Then, just to add a few more nuts to the can, Bill Wilson tells us the rest of our life we have to watch out for fear, self-centeredness, resentment, and self-pity. He told us those were the 4 horsemen, the 4 demons. Not typically, there's the other 4 horsemen in the big book, but those are the 4 demons we need to watch out for the rest of our lives. No, he knew that from our state of mind. And I knew as a person who grew up with an alcoholic father and who could play that song that I never had my dad in my life, and he's at fault for all my woes, I can play that self-pity card just like trump card. It's done. So you name those 8 conditions, 9 conditions I just mentioned there. If anybody felt that all day long at work, in addition, and I'll repeat that, in addition to the normal stressors of life, traffic, my boss yelling at me, I don't have enough money to pay my bills, you think that person is not going to do something to try and fix that? They are going to seek relief. That is a normal thing to do. Now, when I make this argument, I want to back up just a little bit about this being a condition we have since birth. I don't understand the logic of my cohorts in my field not understanding this, to be honest with you. I know there's people out there who probably can say it better than I can say it. But if you take any mental illness, and by the way, alcoholism and addiction is a mental illness. It's listed in the American Diagnostic Psychiatric Manual. This is what we use to get insurance to pay for your treatment. It's right next to all the other conditions. Substance abuse disorder, okay? It's right there. So if I have a mental illness, did it just show up at a certain age? Or has it biologically been implanted in me, and because of my environment, it's just made worse, and what I do makes it worse? Just like if you're implanted with the genes for heart disease, if you live a bad life and eat bad foods, all of a sudden you end up in a heart attack, okay? So what is a mental illness? A mental illness is the way you're going to look at the world and experience it. It's going to coat your perceptions. So if I have bipolar, I'm going to react to this world differently than other people do. And it's my argument that, okay, well, if alcoholism and addiction is a disease, a mental illness that affects my brain, then since birth, I have been seeing, feeling, experiencing, processing, reacting, and acting differently than other people based on my perceptions being a little off. You feel me on that? You go to any meeting in the world and you will hear an alcoholic's perceptions about something, and you'll say, I'm not sure that's what actually happened. My argument, I always say to my patients, is if you leave our hospital today and there's a pileup and people get ejected out of the cars and it's a terrible accident, and you're the one that observed it with 4 other people, and the 4 other people are normal and you're the alcoholic, they're going to have one story that correlates with the cop, and the cop will say that will make sense, and you'll have a completely different version of it. And I know this from my own experience with my isms. I can be in a restaurant with my family, and they're like, oh, the waitress is so nice. Isn't she nice? She's so nice. I say, yeah, that's because she's on pills. And they're like, what's wrong with you? I say, because I see she's on pills. I saw that. They saw that. They didn't. That's where we're different. That's where those isms come into play. My state of mind when I'm sober. Why is that so uncomfortable? Because I need relief. I can't stay in that state of mind all day long. So we have some real science about why this occurs in us, and I'm going to share that with you today. But I want to share one last aspect before we get to the brain. I had and this is one of the greatest honors I've had in my professional career. I spent a year with the soldiers, male and female, who were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan with PTSD. And what a great honor, with people who are so, true warriors, brave, doing things that I could never do myself. And they're placing me in this honored position to help them, right? And they certainly rode me a long time before they accepted me into the group. I had to take my ribbons because that's what happens in the military. But God bless them, they took me in and they told me their truths. And there's a phrase in PTSD that we know one of the biggest triggers will be this thing called hypervigilance. Because of being in battle and in threats to their life, they will be in a state of constant readiness that if the shit goes down, I need to act, I need to prepare, I need to be safe. And that's trained into them. That helps them survive and come back home alive. So literally, it's so powerful that if one of my guys is in a dead sleep and he's unconscious to the world, literally you could shake him and he won't wake up. But if he hears a car backfire, that brain will pick up and go boom, and he'll hit the deck like he got shot at, and he's dodging a bullet. That's what we have. But I like to refine it a little bit because I'm an alcoholic and I want to be special. I think we have this thing called hyperconsciousness. Ever since I was born, my brain has been going a mile a minute, figuring out what everybody is doing in the room and how that reflects on me, and what do they think about me, and do they like me, and what's happening over here. And I shouldn't be too focused on all that. I need to focus on my task, right? I need to do what I need to get done. But instead, my brain's turning on all these different things. Now, what does that look like? When I said earlier about us being misdiagnosed with ADD or ADHD, when the kid's in the classroom doing this and this, maybe he's got alcoholism. I know that sounds like a stretch, but stay with us through this series of podcasts and it will make more sense to you. There is an argument in our field that I don't know where it's at today, but I used to hear it all the time, that is it the fact that we're putting these kids on medications early that is teaching them to take a pill that turns into alcoholism addiction later, or are they more predisposed to alcoholism and addiction? But there is a correlation that they have identified between kids who had ADHD who ended up to being drug addicts and alcoholics later. Maybe they were alcoholics and addicts all the time. I don't know. Consider. So there is a catch-all phrase for this. And when I say hyperconsciousness, I'll tell you how it plays in my brain. Everything is about me, and I interpret the whole world that they're doing it to me, and I'm not going to get what I want. I'm afraid they're going to take away something I have, or I'm going to get what's going to come to me. And I'm filtering that my whole life. So the joke I make in group is that if a gnat farts in South America, my brain goes, what do you mean by that? Because it's about me. I know that. We wouldn't have done that if it wasn't about me. And so hard to turn that brain off. Until what? I take that drink, I take that drug, And my sponsor, who is a king alcoholic, used to say, you remember getting smooth, Christopher? Dr. Barnesbury, you ever remember getting smooth? Yeah, man, smooth, quiet, peaceful. Now, the phrase for that in meetings is called the committee in my head. Again, we have all these bits of information where people are telling us we are different. We process different. We have a mental illness. And yet people don't want to believe it and don't want to talk about it. But I've been collecting these little bits of information and putting the pieces together like a jigsaw puzzle. So this committee in our head is described as I've got all these voices having a meeting. And Bob Earl said, I try to step up and say something, and they'll say, sit down. We'll get to you when we get to you. So he's got his fear voice over here saying this, and he's got his depression voice over here saying this, and he's got his nihilistic voice over here saying it's never going to work out anyway, you're all going to die. And that is constantly going for us. So we can appear to be in a stationary state, watching TV, and nothing's wrong with us. And if I'm not treating my disease, my brain is ticking, and I won't even hear it. That's really the scary part of it. It's like a low buzz feed in the background of just generalized worry. There's a very famous podcaster. I won't mention a name, but he's been in recovery 26 years or more, probably more at this point. And when he talks about going out on tour, and he's like, I don't know what happens to me. He's talking about his disease, but he's not putting the jigsaw pieces together. He goes, I don't know what happens to me. I start instantly worrying, you know what, my ticket's going to be wrong. I'm going to get to the airport. It's not going to be there, or it's going to be wrong. I'm going to be on the wrong flight, and then I won't make the show. But even if I do make the show, I'm going to get there. My plane's going to be late because I'm going to get bumped, and then I'm not going to make the show. But then I do get the show, so I get to the hotel, and I have my reservation all screwed up, so I can't stay there. There's no other reservations in town. And then I get to my hotel. My bags didn't make it, so I don't have my outfit to wear on stage, and it's all going to screw up. And he does this whole thing, man, from his heart of what's going on in his head. And he says, but when I just go, everything's fine. Everything works out. It's okay. But that prior pre-gaming of worry, I still do this to this day. It's so hard to not have your brain be planning, all right, when I get there, we're going to do this and we're going to get that. Just go. Just go and enjoy the experience. You don't have to prepare for everything. So that is the committee in your head. Tell it to shut up. Since I love Bob Earl so much, I'll tell you one last story, and then we'll do the brain science, and we'll start wrapping this up. I'm not going to do it as good as he does, so please look up Bob Earl, E-A-R-L-L. And he talks about, I don't know about you all, but when I wake up, my disease is on the bedpost, and it's waiting for me before I even pee. And it's going, well, you know what happened? You hit that snooze button way too many times. And because you did that, you're going to be late for work. And so you know what they told you? If you're late for work again, they're going to fire you. So you need to make an excuse. You need to come up with something to figure it out. Well, you know what? First of all, screw them. We're better than that job. They're not paying you enough. You deserve better than that. So just don't even go to work today. Oh, wait. If you don't go to work, you don't get a paycheck. We're not going to have money for our booze. Okay, wait a minute. All right, so you're going to go in there. You're going to tell them this. You're going to tell them you had a flat tire. Wait a minute. You had a flat tire 2 weeks ago. You think they'll believe you had 2 flat tires within 2 weeks? You think that's good? No. Okay. Wait a minute. Screw that. All right. Your kid was sick. Let's tell them your kid was sick, and that's a good excuse. Wait a minute. Do you think they know you have kids or don't have kids? And he's having this conversation of self-generated anxiety, self-generated worry, because he's going to be late. He's starting off on a bad foot, but his disease is piling on, right? How many addicts and alcoholics do you know one bad thing happens, they stub their foot, and suddenly they're throwing the whole mix in there going, let's just burn everything down. Let's just get high. And at the end of the conversation, his disease says, all right, one last thing. That little bump you've been feeling on your knee, it's bone cancer. Have a good day, buddy. And my argument is we start out every morning with that handicap going on in our head, and normal people don't. There's actually people who have good levels of dopamine, which we're going to talk about next, who wake up and they don't have any of that noise. And they seem to be more successful than us. And you're comparing yourself going, well, how come I can't do that? Or why can't I get there? There's a reason. You have untreated illness. You don't have tools to tame those voices. And that's the best news I can give you is that recovery, the tools we have available can heal this so that you can sort of have mastery so that when that shit starts, you can sort of be like, all right, shut up. It's not real. That's my mom's stuff. That's what I grew up with. That's my programming. And you can get through life fairly normal. So, all right. So where does all this come from? We've had some really revolutionary breakthroughs to understand, and they're not putting the puzzle pieces together. I just do it in my layman way, and maybe I'm wrong. And go ahead and flame me in the comments if you're a neuroscientist. But in the studies of dopamine, what I've been taught, You have a neurotransmitter in your brain that's dedicated just to the transport of dopamine. If you want to know what a neurotransmitter is, it's essentially a chemical boat. In your brain, you have this thing called the neural net. That is how one part of your brain talks to another part of your brain. It's all these fibers. And I've been told that you have so many fibers in your brain, we could take them out of your head and wire them together, and they would reach from here to the moon and back. Isn't that astounding that you have that many invisible to the naked eye wiring in your brain so that your brain can operate? So you have chemicals that need to go from one part of the brain to the other. You have your hormones and all that good stuff going through your brain. And you have these little things called neurotransmitters, which is going to be like a little boat. It's going to take it from one part of the brain to the other part of the brain. And some boats are dedicated to only one thing. And this neurotransmitter is dedicated to dopamine. As we said in our last episode, dopamine is your feel-good chemical. It's your pleasure chemical. It's your reward and survival chemical. But it's also your motivation. And as we said in the last episode, motivation is king when a person is going out and choosing alcohol or drugs over their kids, because they're being motivated thinking that's what I need more. I need that hit of dopamine, not the other one. When the chemical boat is going down the neural net, it hits a gap. That's called a synapse, because not all of your wires are connected to each other. There's too many of them to be totally connected together. And that synapse's job is to shoot an electric charge to the synapse on the other side to say, I'm going to shoot this neurotransmitter over to you, and when you re-uptake it up, you need to grab that and then send it where I want it to go. And this is all happening faster than we can measure. They have measured it, but it's so fast it would blow your mind how quickly your brain works. When my patients are dealing with triggers and I tell them you can't beat your brain is always going to beat you on speed. So be prepared ahead of time. The problem is, with the neurotransmitter that just takes dopamine across the gap, they have observed under electron microscope a fault in the deficiencies of a brain of an alcoholic and an addict. I didn't mention this before, but a mental illness truly boils down to mental differences and mental deficiencies chemically in the brain. I want to repeat that. Chemically, you have differences and deficiencies from another person. That takes the stigma out of it. And my mom has AFib in her heart. Her heart valve works different than my heart valve works, I hope. And so she has issues that I don't have. That's all that's going on with addiction, really, or mental illness of any kind. There's differences and deficiencies chemically in the brain. There's more to it, but that's the essential bottom line definition. So this neurotransmitter, what happens is it loses some of its cargo. So if you had an oil tanker bringing stuff across the ocean, there'd be a little pile of oil right behind it that's losing. So when it hits this other synapse and it gets sucked up, the feeling you get from that is it didn't quite hit. I'm not quite feeling it. Now, a normal person gets that and they're like, oh, I'm good. I'm okay. No, I don't feel what you feel. I don't understand. Why aren't you happy? Why do you have to use drugs and alcohol? They say that stuff to us all the time. But with us, literally this little thing goes across and it hits and it's lost some of its cargo. So you're not getting the same hit of dopamine. So you're going to feel like you're lacking something. You're going to feel like you need something. And boy, one of the best quotes I ever heard about that is the documentary on Bill W., where a guy in shadow, because they protected his anonymity, said, alcoholics have a thirst. And he just let that hang until she had to really ponder, what's he talking about? I mean, that sounds obvious. No, he's talking about this seeking. I need something. I feel like I'm missing something. I'm looking for something. There's something missing in my life. I need to go over here and find it, do this. So if I have that, I'm going to spend my day looking for something to fill that gap. And here's the crazy hit of all. All drugs that can alter your mood cause your dopamine to spike up. That's the number one thing they do. They do affect your endorphins and other things, but it causes your dopamine to spike up. So if my dopamine is in the basement and my mom's dopamine is up here, and I'm saying, Mom, I don't feel it. And she says, what do you mean? We're going to go to the picnic today, and we're going to have fried chicken, and we're going to play croquet. You want to play croquet? And I'm a 15-year-old going, I ain't feeling it. I don't want to go. But as an alcoholic, that's how I'm feeling it. But here's what happens. I can take that 16-year-old kid, and I can give him a big old fat blunt, and I can give him a six-pack. And after he drinks that, he's grabbing that croquet mallet, and he wants to play, and he's part of life at last. You get that? Taking that right back to Bill Wesson. There's that missing piece. That's what I was looking for. That's exactly what I needed. And almost everybody, if they're honest and they're telling their story, will tell you that was a revolutionary, transformative moment when they found their particular drug that they preferred the most. It was like, oh, where have you been my whole life? I know I felt that way. It was so strong for me, I felt like I had found God. Now, not literally, but in the sense that this was the one thing and I'd heard all these people going to church in my family saying, no, this is where you go and you should feel this way. And I never felt that way. Growing up in my church, I was lacking. I was looking for something else. But when I got that hit, it was like overwhelmingly, I hit the lottery. This is the missing piece, the missing link. So if I could just pursue it to the point where I could use to be normal, we would have no issue. We'd have no jails. We'd have no treatment centers. I'd be out of a job. That's fine. I wouldn't want the world to have to suffer. But we do have a second thing that takes over called the phenomenon of craving, which we will talk deeper about in a future episode. We don't know where the limit is to stop. We do have a kind of brain that says, well, if 1 is good, 2 is better, and 4 is better. I still have that with Tylenol or any other thing. Or sugar. Let's pour it on. As long as a little bit, let's go a little bit more. I still have that to this day. It's just the way we're wired. We're a little bit different that way. I can hear my mom saying as a kid, that's enough salt. No, it's not. So we overshoot that mark, and now I'm in the middle of the street fighting with the cops with my clothes off, and they're like, what's wrong with you? It's like, I overshot the mark. I was just trying to be normal. So therein lies the tragedy of the addict alcoholic. They have this lack inside. They have this empty hole, and they're looking for something to fill it up, and I find it, and it works, and we're like, praise God. Finally, mercy. I have something that works. And then they go to use it, and it's addictive. And it starts to wrap its claws around me. And it's progressive, meaning that the same effect won't work over time. I've got to use more, or I've got to do heavier stuff. And before you know it, you're in this trap. And all you did was try to find relief. And boy, does the world beat us up for that. They will hang you in the past as an addict alcoholic. They will put you in the stockades and have the kids throw tomatoes at you in the middle of the town square. And we still do that today. Don't think that perp walk on the nightly news when you see those people walk up to the window and this person was driving drunk last night and they did this and this and this. And this person's like, I don't know what happened. I was just looking for relief. Is that making excuses? No, it's a reason. I'm going to say that throughout this entire podcast. If you don't understand logic about the way things work, you will be in the darkness of ignorance and you'll constantly be beating against that wall. Why do they do that? Why do they do that? Why do they do that? We have reasons now why they do that. So, in recovery, to wrap it up. And by the way, when I say my mom is different, the way I like to think about it is like a thick blanket around her. When I talk about that hyper-consciousness and I talk about when I take that first drink, I just don't care about the world anymore. I don't have to think about all that stuff. It's quiet upstairs. Thank God meditation does the same thing. We'll talk about that in a future episode. But I feel like my mom has this blanket of protection around her where things just don't bother her so much. It's just not as bothersome. Me, everything's bothersome because I'm irritable. A guy over here could be tapping his pencil on the desk. And my mom will be oblivious just talking and not even hear it. And my ears over here going, is that guy going to shut up or what is he doing? Hyperconsciousness, man. I can't get my brain to shut up. That is the true heart of our disease. On a side note, as long as we're here, there's a brilliant instance. When Bill Wilson was getting sober, we had one of our friends go over to see Dr. Carl Jung, who is the student of Sigmund Freud, and he's considered the father of modern psychology. This is a brilliant, brilliant doctor. And this man had paid millions of dollars. I mean, his family had paid so much money for him to see him over a year. And at the end of the year, the guy goes to him and says, okay, what do I do? And the guy says, Dr. Carl Jung says, I don't know what to do, man. I've tried all these interventions and nothing seems to be working. And I have to tell you, my honest experience with you guys is that you're hopeless. Nothing seems to be able to be done for you guys. And so this guy says, I felt like the gates of hell clanged on me. So what the hell? What do I do? He goes, well, every now and then there's these revolutionary miracle experiences, spiritual transformative experiences where a guy had one way of looking at things and his whole brain gets switched the other way and now he sees it different. He would have said it's like a come to Jesus moment, the way we say it today, but he didn't have those words back then. And so the guy got real excited, the patient, and said, oh, well, I go to church, so I'm good, right? And he said, no. I'm talking about something else to fill you up. And so he had his own theories about the way we act and about what's really wrong with us. But Bill Wilson had a chance to ride him before they both passed away. And the guy was older now and he was retired and he didn't care. He told Bill Wilson exactly what he thought. He said, oh, good. I'm glad to hear the guy made it okay and came to your group. And I'm pleased to hear that you guys are doing what you're doing. But, I always had thoughts about addicts and alcoholics, but I was afraid to say it as a young guy because I was afraid I'd be laughed out of my profession. He essentially says in this letter, you guys are different because you seem to feel these things more intensely. And in my experience, he called it a Latin phrase, spiritus spiritum. I went to public school. I didn't get Latin. But it means seeking the spirit inside the fullness through the spirit of the bottle. Because you said in America, you call alcohol spirits. And he said, it always seemed like y'all were looking for something to fill you up and you're missing a piece. But you just seem to feel life more intensely. And that's me hearing that guy tapping his pencil when I'm trying to focus in class. I hope that helps everybody. So to wrap it up, what we need to find in recovery is new sources of dopamine. We need new sources of connection. We need to have a passion and a purpose. I like when Jordan Peterson says you need an adventure, man. You need something that's going to get you out of bed in the morning. You need something to sink your teeth into. And I will tell you that addicts and alcoholics have amazing skills that if you can get your defects out of the way, you can be king of the world and run companies and make tons of money and be very successful. Because well, I'll just put it this way. When I say to my patients, when you wanted something that day, did you usually get it? And they go, oh, yeah. Well, if you could just apply that in your life without these other problems, think about how successful you'd be. And that sense of connection and fullness, and usually it comes through service work. That's the best place to find it. If you're helping somebody else, that gives you a high. My friend and I, Dan, were talking about that before the podcast, better than anything else. It's a clean high. It just makes you feel good about yourself, and you can sleep well that night like a baby. So we have the tools to replace that dopamine deficiency. But be careful, because I just know that Big Pharma is going to come out with an answer someday and say, well, you know what? You just need to take this drug, and it'll be a synthetic opiate. Oh, you ever heard about synthetic opiates? Yeah, we had those, OxyContin and all that stuff. What happens to us when you give me that? I want more. Don't listen to them. So there you go. I hope that was helpful about what is really wrong with us. If you have any questions about that, please send emails. I'm happy to elucidate and expand on that. As I said, it's one of my favorite topics to talk about. So what'd you think, Dan? Any thoughts about all that? When,
I love it.
Doing my spew over here.
And, you can just relate to so much of it. And when you was talking about Burns talking about, did you feel smooth? I always had and I don't know if I got it from somebody else or I made it up, but there was a static going on in my brain all the time. I likened it to back when the TVs would go off at midnight or whatever, and you might have fell asleep in front of it and you woke up and it's just going, and then colored bars would be on the TV, and that's what that kind of thing was what I would feel. And when I would take a drink or a drug, when I'd get something in me, then it would just turn that static off.
Quiet.
And there's another thing that you see everybody talk about, like they talk about, they will mimic hitting a joint, and you'll see them and they'll be the sigh after after hitting the shot, after poking the needle, after eating the pills, and the effect hasn't even hit you yet. Just that little bit, and that sigh of relief that I'm finally where I need to be.
And mind you, normal people, I've watched my family drink their whole lives. If they're not alcoholic, they don't react that way.
Yeah, they don't do that.
They just take a sip and say, what are you talking about? It's just like water. It's just, I'm just having my dinner. I'm not focused on the wine to fix me. I say, well, that's where we're different, Mom. I'm just a little bit different than you.
Yeah, and I'm definitely noticing throughout sponsoring guys who sponsor guys who sponsor guys, when it hit a certain age, everybody has been treated with ADHD and ADD. It's
especially during the 80s and 90s.
When you hit them when they were about 20 years younger than me, you're seeing that hit time after time after time, and they're still wrestling with it. And again, you were talking a minute ago, for taking drugs to deal with a drug problem. Taking a substance to deal with a substance problem just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and you just see that, and I've heard that before too. Another favorite AA speaker, Earl Hightower, talks about when he was a kid that he didn't feel okay, and there was something wrong with him, and he just knew it, and they said, okay, try this, and he said, boom, oh, I'm okay now, and it said two things happened. One thing is it was lit off, the fact that, the kind of the allergy kind of phenomenon, craving kind of thing. And he learned that if you weren't okay, just take something. That'd fix you, right off as a kid. You get trained. Well, we talk about all the time about how we're trained as we grow up to do things. And like you talked about in the last episode, training the dog or anything else, you trained me that if I'm not okay, I just take a pill. You get that started pretty dang early.
We're unfortunately training our kids on that every day with the commercials. We're the only. I don't want to say only, but I think we're definitely not like Europe. They don't allow it at all. We're the only nation I know about that allows advertising drugs on TV. They just don't do that in other nations. They don't want to put out that message that, oh, you need the purple pill or you need the yellow pill or here's your solution.
Having trouble with this?
Yeah.
Try
and
this.
Don't you notice how there's been this explosion? Somebody said this to me yesterday about they were asking about the youth, and I don't want to pick on the youth because they're just a product of what we're putting out there as oldsters. It's our fault, really.
Yeah, we trained them.
Right, exactly. We're training them on this stuff. But she said, it just seems like they have more issues. And I said, well, I wonder, is the fact that all this commercial is telling them they need to have issues because you need to buy our product that makes them wonder, maybe I got that. Maybe I need the purple pill. It's a vicious cycle. Yeah.
He was talking about the first time, and I've said this a bunch on the podcast, but we were sitting at the very table in the very room where I had my first with a couple buddies in middle school, drinking on a snow day when my parents were gone. And it was, where has this been all my life? I'm okay now. Of course, that time and pattern for the rest of my life was overshooting the mark. Woke up in bed later on not having any idea what had happened here. And that was a pattern for all my life.
And isn't it interesting that society will say, well, that was an illegal drug you used, or if you drank that you were too young, that was wrong, you shouldn't have done that. And it's like, well, wait a minute. What it ultimately was dopamine. And I hope that was made clear by this conversation. It really doesn't matter what you use.
Right.
Now, I'm not trying to stir up controversy, but I will tell you, you could literally call all the programs Dopamine Anonymous because that's what we're all getting. I don't care what you drink. I don't care what you shoot heroin. And they always want to just think, well, I wasn't like that. I wouldn't, whatever.
Yeah.
You're still getting dopamine. And dopamine is a natural chemical in your brain that God gave us. This is what we're meant to do. And we're meant to seek out pleasure. We're conditioned by reward. Just like your dog, give him a treat for doing a trick. We get our paycheck at the end of the week for doing a terrible job. If I hate my job. So, these aren't bad things, but it's the way we label them, good, bad, whatever. And it sets up a pathology, I think, of guilt and shame, which drives people deeper into their addiction.
Yep. And, it goes to that old myth here that, guys say, well, I didn't have a problem with this, and they do the old switcheroo where we substitute and we put down the thing that was our current problem and pick up a new problem and convince ourselves that I won't get in the same trouble with this, or I'm still sober because I'm not using the thing that I was a heroin addict. I quit doing heroin, but now all I'll do is drink and celebrating sobriety.
And have you observed too, like in newcomers, their inability to sit still, their inability to concentrate?
That's right. You can see them when they come in, especially in meetings. You can see. I say they're vibrating.
Vibrating. That's what
you can see them vibrating. You can feel them vibrating, man. And I've had some guys vibrating so bad that it deterred me. I didn't. All I wanted to do was get away from them.
The old timers of my group up in Minnesota were so kind, man, which is why I made it my home group. They said, I went back many years later. I was like 20 years sober or something. And he goes, when you came in here, and they never told me this back then, you came in here, man, you were going 1,000 miles an hour, but you weren't moving.
Yeah.
I was like, what's that mean? And I was like, oh, I thought about it. I said, I know what you mean. What was going on.
Yeah.
I thought I had it hidden. I thought you didn't see, because we do a lot to act and cover up like we're normal and fit in, right?
Yep. You can look around the room. Our group sits in a big circle, and you can look around at the knee bouncers and the people that are recovered are sitting there just chill, and then next to them is somebody's knee up and down and up and down. I'll just elaborate on one thing about the Bob Earl tape that you were talking about is called The Vulture on the Headboard or Head Trips.
Awesome.
It'll fall under both of those names if you want to find it on the internet and listen to Bob. I am a huge Bob Earl fan too, and have a stash of about 40 Bob Earl tapes that I've scabbed off the internet here and there. Some of them are awful quality from back in the 60s and stuff, but you can still hear his message.
By the way, that's going to be a theme of this podcast is that, we want to talk about everything that's new and everything we're still learning about a very complex condition. This is the most complicated illness that exists. I've had neuroscientists top in their field go straight on record. Other cancer, diabetes, they're bad, but they don't even touch how complicated and all the different aspects you have to look at to heal somebody and help them get sober. So when Bob Earl, we have all that wisdom that has come since 1935. And my favorite quote I think Bob Earl says is like, don't tell me everything I need to know is in the first 164 of the pages of the book, because if I'm about to have surgery, I hope to God that my surgeon has read a medical book besides those in 1930.
Yep.
So we're in a new dawn, a new age right now with what we're learning through technology. And I just want to know more about who I am and why I'm this way. I was that way as a kid. Before I even took a first drink, I just knew that, man, I'm clicking on a different wavelength.
Yep.
I've heard some people say that it's like I'm on this vibration and everybody else is down here, and I don't know that I don't fit in until I get with my own people, and then everybody else is vibrating. Or the guy says, I like to be in a meeting where everybody's mind misfires at the same time that mine does. Because we all relate,
Yep.
But if you say that to your family, they're like,
and
you don't know what you're talking about, bro.
And in our when we're out there doing it too, when we leave our old friends behind because they're not using it at the level we are, we chalk up to the groups that are using like we do, And my history, I would surpass that group, and I'd have to find a new group. And a couple of spoke about it. I was king of the disappearing act, It'd be like, get a phone call tomorrow at 2:00. What happened to you last night? Where'd you go? And sometimes it would be in the bushes in somebody's backyard. It would be a walk home from there, and I wouldn't know where I was at except for I woke up in this spot, and would pull those disappearing acts. Good stuff.
And if there's anything else we can say on the podcast today, guys, is we want to create an environment that's safe. We can talk about all this stuff and you will be accepted. These are secrets I would keep so deep down inside before I came to the program. I would never let you see my weaknesses or my flaws or my weirdness. It's so important to fit in, so important to look okay. Yeah, you don't have to carry that anymore in recovery.
And the relief of when I got to the rooms and I sat in a meeting and heard people talk about just exactly the way I felt. There was a relief in that I wasn't the only person feeling like I feel.
You know what I always tell my patients too? This is worldwide. We are so U.S., Kentucky, wherever you live, centric. But you think, oh my God, you mean there's a dude in Japan?
Yeah.
I want to let you tell that story real quick. And then, there's a guy in France. I mean, they feel exactly the same, but we are totally different people. Touch on that for a second about going to that meeting.
2018, I guess it was. I was a couple years sober, maybe at 17. Heck, I don't remember. I had just gotten off of probation for my last crime that got me allowed me to hit my bottom, and I had the opportunity to go to Nagasaki, Japan, and I ended up all day long wandering up through Nagasaki to end my day at this meeting that was going to happen at that evening. And it was so cool, and I had no idea where I'm going. I can't read street signs. I don't know anything. The tech really wasn't helping you. And I saw a guy with his knee up on a bench, with his knee on his elbow, and he was huffing a cigarette. And that was like a symbol to me. I could see an aura around the dude, and I was like, "That's where it's at."
That's those are my people.
Yeah, those are my people. Yep. And got in there, and what my short saying about that is that I couldn't understand a word they were saying, and they couldn't understand a word I said, but it did not matter. I could hear the tone, I could hear the pain in the new people's voices, I could see it on them. There was that magical thing that happened that they were reading how it works, and I was walking through with my finger thinking about the cadence of that, how it works, and we're tuned into it, right? And I guess there's no Japanese for A, B, and C, and when he said our adventures before and after made clear 3 pertinent ideas, and I was right there with my finger just hoping that I was reading how it works about the same time they were. The dude said A, blah, 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 B, and I was right there with them on the cadence of that. That's and awesome. It was so cool. There was one guy that could speak a little English. I sat in there listening to people share, and like I said, I couldn't understand a single thing anybody was saying. And when they insisted, which I felt funny about, but they insisted on me because there was only like 8 people in the meeting, and they just went around the room. And when it became my turn, man, they were not going to let me off the hook. They were, no, you go, And there was the one old guy, his name was Shy. Who had his lights on. That's another funny thing, is you could see that he had the juice. He was the old timer, and he also took particular care with me as the old timer. I have a signed copy of their little meeting book still today from that meeting, and gave him my big book. We traded, and
I'll bet he's so proud. He probably shows that off to everybody. Look, I got an American Big Book. What the heck? Yeah, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it was. It's one of the coolest things, and you hear that story fairly often of us. You were talking about that, of going all over the world and going to 12-step meetings all over the world, and what a great experience it is for everybody that has an opportunity to do that. Heck, it's fun just going out of town, let alone across the ocean.
What touches me the most about that story is you could see the suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And, we have a fellowship, in case anybody out there is struggling, of people that are just waiting to wrap their arms around you, man. If you will just get your ego out of the way and take a chance, we truly understand where you have been and what you're going through.
Yep.
And we will accept you. We won't judge you. We'll say, hey, man, it's okay. You can just be yourself.
Yep.
And to be able to feel that suffering from a human being on the opposite side of the planet that, doesn't speak your language, has a completely different culture, but still that connection of boom.
Yeah.
That's my guy. I know what that pain is like.
And
that's a powerful bond.
The exclamation point on the end of the meeting and feeling that as they get their paper out of their pocket and unfold it and have the chairperson sign it.
That's so awesome. They got drug court in Japan. How about that? That is awesome.
Yeah, then he's like, oh, yep, I thought I was reading that correctly.
We've got our questions for the week. And again, if you'd like to have anything answered or anything you'd like us to kick around here, me and Dan are more than happy to do that. Just send your questions to im12recovery@gmail.com. That is im12recovery@gmail.com. Please send us questions and comments. We'd love to hear from you. And like and subscribe, as we always say on every podcast. Two questions this week we're going to touch on, and I think they're really interesting for people, especially who already have some recovery, might need to ponder on these issues. First question is, in my experience, in my early sobriety, and even 4 years into my recovery, when you take care of one or two addictions, another one may surface. Do you still have forms of quote-unquote addiction, even maybe non-traditional, that you still have to deal with? All right. Great question. Complicated question. There's no cure for the alcoholic mind, but there are tools to discipline it. And we have a 1 day at a time program where literally every morning I'm trying to go, okay, let me default to my tools instead of to my best thinking, because my best thinking usually gets me into trouble. And same deal with my behaviors. If I'm left alone to a new source of dopamine, I'm more than likely going to fall into a trap where I'm going to want more and more and more and more. And since today we talked about this thing that we're seeking relief and we're seeking a way to deal with this world and its stupid people and the idiotic systems and institutions we have. I mean, Lordy, if you've had to deal with your insurance company over a bill that wasn't paid like I had to 2 months ago and sit on the phone for hours, that stuff is making us sick, right? We call it spiritual sickness, but it's making your soul, it's making your little child inside sick, and you can't be happy and joyous and free while you're sick. So you're going to go seek relief naturally. And like I said, we live in a dopamine delivery system. On my way to Dan's house, I passed a vape store. I passed a fast food place. I passed a gas station where I get all kinds of other garbage. I passed a wine and liquor store. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there to be able to get, and soon there will be maybe not in Indiana, but in Kentucky, I'm pretty sure marijuana is going to be coming soon. We just legalized medical marijuana. So it's so easy to fall into those traps. And there's an approach that I've learned in my later recovery that's taken me a long time to get to. And I first want to encourage you with this piece of feedback. Don't be so harsh on yourself, and don't try to beat yourself up if you have little slips or troubles with other areas. Our elixir is always to go to our sponsor and be honest. If you keep it secret, it will grow and it may get out of hand. But if you go to your sponsor and say, look, I need to tell you, I've been spending a little too much money at the boat, the casino or whatever I'm doing. If you're honest about it, you'll mostly stay out of trouble. But what we tend to do is we say, well, I must be failing in my recovery, or I'm not working my program right, or my spirituality is wrong. Why am I getting into this stuff? And my argument is underneath being an addict alcoholic, you're still a human being. And I mean that with all the heart I've got to give to you. We have got to give ourselves a break because we're so hypercritical. When we talked about the committee in our head today, that inner critic, oh my Lord, when I bring that up in group, every one of my people is like, oh yeah, I've got that. I've definitely been picking myself all day long. You're not doing right. You're not doing right. You need to do better. You're not doing enough. So first off try to take a loving approach that, man, I'm just a human being trying to get through. And if I ate Cheetos this week and I shouldn't have, I'm going to try to do better next week. That tends to work better than the swear offs. I have learned through my time, my own experience, and through the experience of my fellows that swearing off and saying, I'm never going to do that again. I'm having my last time doing it. It just is doomed to fail. There is another podcaster that's a very famous comedian, and he plays episodes from 7 years ago on one day. In addition to the local one, he does a short one, then he plays one from 7 years ago. And you can listen to his journey, as I've listened to him over the years, putting down cigars or not drinking. And then all of a sudden he's back to drinking. And it's just human, okay? So first off, you're just a human being. You're doing the best you can. What we want to avoid is becoming a pathological condition where it's repetitive and I start using it to cope and I'm keeping it secret. And then before you know it, I could possibly develop a full-blown second addiction that I might even need to get professional help with. And through my career of getting sober, I've gone to many different meetings for many different issues. I'll tell you what's fun to do, as we talked about earlier in this group. If my disease existed before I touched my first drink or drug, please go back through your childhood and figure out what you used to cope with this voice in your head, this stuff in your head, the static, as Dan called it. Go back and look at yourself and say, what did I use to cope? I know for myself, my first drug that I found in this world was sugar. And every time I got dessert, I would work my mom for a second cookie. I loved it. And it was my first altered mind. And then as my family system got sick and my dad's alcoholism showed up, I could escape into TV. And I could go live with the Brady Bunch. And I could go be happy on Gilligan's Island and not have to hear all that noise going on behind me. Again, being compassionate towards myself, being kind towards myself, not beating myself up. I'm just trying to figure it out and get through life. And then when I hit puberty, wow. Brian Ferry, Roxy Music, said love is the drug that I'm thinking of, and that was certainly one of the best chemicals I ever found. I had a new relationship every week because I just like to be at that high. I wasn't much about having a relationship. I was about the high. And so you're going to find people fall into that in early recovery all the time. They're always going to get other obsessions, other issues that are going to come up for them. What we want to avoid, though, is that turning into a situation where it works against your sobriety. So I'm going to give you some hardcore tools that really work for me the best. Being involved in the lives of others. Bill Wilson said that as we fall on our character defects, if we will throw ourselves the harder into working with other people, we will find that it will make it easier. And I have found that when I get a new sponsee, or I'm more involved with the groups, or I'm just got a new project, like I'm a writer and I'm finishing 2 books right now, that really takes up a lot of time, so I don't have time to get into too much trouble. A lot of times addictions are very opportunistic, where they're looking for a chance to slip in the window, as I say. And so if you've got too much time on your hands, or you don't, not unmet needs, I'm not happy with my job, not much going on, so I'm just going to sit here and start binging Netflix or doing whatever I'm doing. But if you have another thing in your life, doesn't matter if your job isn't any good. You're looking forward to getting off work so you can go home and work on your thing. For my friend Dan, it's being in the wood shop all night, and he likes to work on his wood. And he's an artist, and that gives him that dopamine high that he's looking for. I don't think eating a bag of Cheetos would give him the same dopamine high. I'll let him speak in a little bit here. So, first of all, be kind to yourself. Secondly, know that it's normal. We are addictive people. We are obsessive people. If it feels good, I'm going to want more. But just be honest with your sponsor and don't hide it. That seems to be the place where I think people run into trouble, is that dishonesty. And dishonesty seems to be the number one cause of relapse in general. When a person gets so sick that they just say, oh, screw it, I might as well just drink. Be careful. Be careful with that. But yes, of course, we all struggle with other forms of addiction. But I'll be honest with you, at 40 years sobriety, that is the sweetness of recovery. The longer you're in this deal and the more you work it, Bill said it becomes a working part of your mind. I don't really fall into trouble like I used to. Like, I always have a barometer for addicts and alcoholics. If you didn't get arrested today, it was a good day. If you didn't hurt anybody today, it was a good day. So I'm not doing that. I'm not stepping on the toes of my fellows like I might have in early recovery with the relationship thing and things like that. I've gotten more tamed and I have more discipline, but it just comes with time and experience in the program. But number one tool, please share with your supports what you're going through so they can help you stay out of trouble. All right, last question of the day. When you know a friend or a family member is struggling with addiction or with alcohol use, how many times do you invite them to come to a meeting or offer your assistance to help before you stop inviting them to meetings or offering to help? Well, I have a theory on that, and I'm a little bit of a rogue counselor on this, or maybe there's other counselors out there who do this same thing. I have stopped making my patients get their papers signed at AA and NA meetings. And I talked to my boss about it, and he was okay about it. I feel like it puts an edge of punishment on it. And I don't think recovery should be associated with punishment. Over the years, I've watched a lot of people who came to the program through the penal system. And they've had to do like the SAP program. It's called Substance Abuse Program here in Kentucky. And it's how they got introduced to the tools. And it feels like someone else was making them do it. And with an addicted alcoholic, if someone else is making you do it, we're never going to do it. So as you're inviting them, as you're telling them, you know, I need to help you, you need to, they're hearing like, no, you're getting in my business. You're trying to tell me what to do. And they're going to shut down. They're just going to shut down as our natural default. One thing we can't stand is being controlled or being told what to do. It's part of our nature. It's part of our isms. You can make the invite, but if they decline, you have to let it go at that. To keep trying and knocking on a door that's locked is not going to help it unlock any faster. Not with this disease, in my experience. So I really am big on that. I don't want my people feeling like they have to. And I have found in my group, I even had a patient feed this back to me just recently. It astonished me because I'd been thinking the same thing. I said, you know what? This is going to be the last time I'm going to tell you to call this guy because I've been trying to hook him up with this guy that I knew was going to be perfect for him. And I was like, if you just talk to him, you're going to get it off, I promise. I just know you guys are really alike. Your backgrounds are so identical. And he's like, nope. He just wouldn't do it. And I was like 3 weeks later, I said, all right, this is the last day I'm ever going to bring up. You should call this person and talk to him. And you know what this person said back to me? He said, oh, I was just waiting for you to say that. Now I can do it because it's my own idea. It's just the way we are. So tell her she's welcome. Tell her or him that, you know, I care about you. As I said before in the other episode, just let them know you love them and say there is a solution. I found something that really works. And when you're ready, you can just let me know. Or if you don't want to do it, that's okay too. In my own family, I've had to accept people's right to be sick. And boy, is that a hard one. You have an absolute right to live your own life, even if it kills you. I don't have any control over that. So how many times or when do you know how many times to stop inviting them? Usually when it's not working. I know it sounds like an obvious statement, but to keep doing the same thing, expecting different results, that's our definition of insanity. So if you have told her, I don't know, 5, 6 times and she still ain't come, you might want to just leave it alone for a while. And don't be surprised. I'll say again, leave it alone for a while. Watch that little cat or dog come to the food plate just because you weren't looking at it. Isn't that funny with pets? It's like they're doing a trick and you try to film it and they stop. You're like, damn it, because they're not going to do it because you want them to do it. That's kind of addicts and alcoholic behavior right there. Any thoughts on those questions there, Dan? Anything touch you on
You
those?
just ping me on that, and it's something that I see, and it's a little bit of some sponsor, what do you call it, mind tricks, you know?
Jedi.
A Jedi mind tricks of getting a guy to let it be their idea, and my experience is the same as yours, and I've taken the same path. I will open the door for them, and then usually I'm pretty quick to say I'm not going to hit you over the head with this, but you know where I'm at. You know, if you want some help, and completely leave it alone from there on out. Every time I run into them, and I can't believe, you know, my own brother. And a number of other people that I just said, here it is, and then just went on my business. I didn't dodge them. I didn't hang around with them a lot either, because I'm not looking to be hanging around with drunks, with people who are currently using, but then watch them, you know, someday when it became their idea, you know, hey man, can I? In my brother's case, he just went on his own, you know, and had enough, and he actually called me, and they called him and his wife called me and told me they had been to their first AA meeting and they were going to quit drinking. And I think I was like 5 years sober, you know, waiting on that, not doing it. And it was hard not to say something to him, you know. But that, it's probably the single hardest thing in the world is dealing with somebody who's close to you that is using. You said it before. It's terrible to have people you care about continue to harm themselves in that way when you know there is a solution available to them, but until they're ready, you know, and that's maybe my worst liked statement in the rooms is they're just not ready. But the fact is, it's the truth.
That if they are not ready, there is a bit of a mystical process that occurs underneath our wavelength that we don't understand why a person gets ready at a certain point or why they don't. And you have to let that organically unfold. There's no way to speed that up. Nope. You can send them to 1,000 treatment centers and they're just not really ready. You're wasting your money. Yeah. And a lot of people do waste their money, thousands and thousands of dollars, and they're like, it didn't work. Not if they're not wanting to go on their own.
Yep. The patient has to comply with the treatment. Mm-hmm. If they don't want the treatment, there's no amount of it you can put on them and make them make it work.
Mm-hmm. So another thing you said that pinged me, but it slipped out of my head here. But overall, just love them. That's all you can do. Let them know you care, you know. Oh, I was going to tell you. That's a little technique, by the way. I use it all the time. And a neuroscientist taught me, if you can't remember what you were saying, change the topic, start talking about something else, and all of a sudden, boom, it'll be right there. That happens every time since I practiced that tool. And now I'm going to forget it again. No, the tool that works for me in a group setting, if there's any counselors listening, is I try to emphasize without rubbing it in their face, because they can tell when you're being excessive. But I will celebrate and really let the people who are doing good talk about the meetings. And I find that sometimes they're more receptive to hear it from a fellow who's only got a week sober rather than this counselor dude who's as soon as you're in an authority position, addicts and alcoholics already shut down to anything you have to say. But if they hear it from their partner, like, man, I went there and they were really nice, dude, and you got to come. I watched in this last group I've had right now where one guy went and he brought a 2. And then two brought a 4. And each week we're getting more of them to come because the guys are now saying, you got to come join us. It's a good group. Yeah. And I don't have to do any work. I can just let them do the work. Now, in this situation, they don't have a group to work with. But
that, that's another phenomenon. And I talked to a guy about it the other night. And one of these things about having a friend, and his friend wants him to sponsor him. And what I find is my experience is it was a stranger that saved me. It's not my relatives, it's not my friends, it's not anything like that. It's going to be some stranger that says something to that person that pings them. Like your guys don't know each other in that room. They're building a relationship. They don't know one another. And it's an interesting thing that the alcoholic addict will listen to some stranger more than the people who are around them and love them the most. And then, not to mention, like you said, that authority position thing. If it's somebody of authority tells you, the judge, the cops, your lawyer, that kind of stuff is just an instant wall going up. That old Bob Earl thing about, when you offer me something, I instantly reject it.
Even if it's a warm chocolate chip cookie?
Yep.
I don't do that.
I'm good. I'm good.
So just to wrap up, that's kind of what we want to do with this podcast. We want to give you the rules of the road. And you just described it perfectly. Man, it's probably going to be a stranger. And so you need to sort of take yourself out of the equation. Don't take it personally. It's just the way this disease, it has certain methodologies that we've learned over the years work best or don't work. So we're going to give you a lot of that throughout this podcast. Just rules of the road, whether you have this disease or whether you know somebody that's suffering from it. How do you navigate that? And so these are going to be the stop sign, yield, turn left. We're going to give you the rules of the road to help you get through that.
Yep. Share our experience. That's what when the guy asked me the other day about the sponsoring his friend, and I said, wasn't it a stranger that helped you? You didn't know your sponsor when you met him. It was a whole group of strangers that touched you. And my experience is I have really never, ever seen that work. I've seen that get people in the door. I've seen that so I wouldn't just say no. It ain't going to hurt them, but I bet it doesn't work out. But maybe you'll bring them in, and then they'll find somebody else they really want to work with. And while the door's open, strike while the iron's hot kind of thing. And
it's a lottery. There are people in my group who get sent by work or by jail. And sometimes they're in that right moment where they're ready to receive.
Eventually, that's what happened to me. Eventually I got in enough pickle that I started that gift of desperation was given to me that at some level I had a couple choices: go to prison or get sober. And not always is that what Bill says. Die an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis is not always an easy choice.
What kind of alcoholic death are we talking about? That's what the question is.
Just how bad's it going to be?
So if you all would like to hear more about Dan's fabulous experience facing those serious consequences and coming out of it and transforming, his story is available on his podcast called The Spiritual Underground Podcast with Dan Reeves. It's available everywhere. Just Google it, you'll find it. And it's a podcast where people tell their stories, and you can find my story on there, you can find Dan's story on there. And if you want to be on the podcast, if you're somewhere in this world and you've got some recovery going on, give him a buzz. It's easy to find, and he'll get you set up.
Yep. You can just use that same email Christopher gave you and tell Christopher, and he'll hook us up.
Definitely. What was that email? I am 12recovery@gmail.com. So we hope you've enjoyed this episode. We want to make this entertaining. We want to have some fun. We mostly want to educate and provide information. One last thing I'll end on that I did want to say today. The saddest statistic we have in recovery and addiction is that only 1 out of 10 people ever get help. That still rings true today. And you would think, well, how is that possible with our plugged in world? It seems like people, no, they don't. We are very fortunate in Louisville. We are known as a recovery hotbed. It's over 500, but I've heard some people say 600 meetings a week just in AA. That's extraordinary for a town our size. That is unusual. But if you go outside our city, it drops off precipitously. You can't find treatment centers. There's no insurance. People are too poor. And there's no freaking meetings even. So these poor people are having to suffer from this indignity of, well, you're just doing it on purpose and you don't care about your mother and that's why you're an asshole. You're just doing it, So our goal here is to bring more of that information available to more people, because 1 out of 10 getting help is not acceptable, in my opinion. So that is our honest goal for this, is hopefully some people will get more help, turned in the right direction, and less people will have to die of this awful disease, which took my father, and I don't want to see it take anybody else. So we do thank you for being with us. As for Dan and as for me, we wish you well. Have a great week. And please come back and see us and like and subscribe as usual. And we'll keep doing them for you. Thanks for joining us today. And we'll end with a serenity prayer as we usually do. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Just for today. Keep coming back. It works if you work it, and you die if you don't.